Hello to all our people that are following us. On behalf of the organizer, welcome to the workshop on open citation and open scholarly metadata. This is the second edition of the workshop that today is held online due to the current situation about the pandemic, of course. I would like to personally thank all the fellow organizers that helped me in organizing this great event, which are David Schattenfeld-Meyer, Giovanni Colavizza, Marilena D'Aquino, Matteo Romanello, and Ludo Waltman, for all the effort that they have dedicated for making this online event a reality. Just a few words about how the workshop is organized. The program includes 10 different speakers who will introduce different kind of aspects around the world of open citation and open scholarly metadata. In addition to the speakers, we had also opened a kind of call for abstract videos, which was a kind of success. We received a lot of submission. All of them, the video of all the accepted submission have been uploaded on the workshop website, and they will be introduced in a while. All the event is streamed online on different channels, YouTube, Periscope, and also it can be followed on Twitter. If anyone from the audience want to ask some question, we invite them to use this channel to make questions in the live chat. And then we will publish this question after the talk of the speakers in order to show them online and allow the speaker to answer. Nothing more to add right now. I would like to leave the stage now to all the speakers, but before I will invite Marilena on the stage in order to introduce the contribution, the video contribution we have received, and in order to introduce indeed these works, and then to introduce the first speaker. Thank you all. Marilena, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. From Buckinghamshire, actually, while Silvio is in Bologna, we are streaming from several cities. And I want to thank all the authors. As Silvio mentioned, I would like you to have a look, oops, not this one. I would like you to have a look at the program that is online and to watch the videos of the authors that contributed to the workshop. I will not go into the details of every contribution because we could make an entire workshop only dedicated to that, but I would kindly encourage you to have a look at them because they propose diverse topics. So we have a couple of contributions from fellows in Ukraine that they are working on an open citation index, and they explain all about the difficulties that there are in their specific situation for creating such an important resource. So I invite you to watch the videos of Sergei Nazarovets and Alessia Mriglod. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Or if you are interested, you will see some contributions about more specific field related topics and problems, like Roderick Page's work on the citation patterns in the taxonomy field, or our contributors, I'm sorry, I don't want to pronounce their names, but they are Tomasz Panecki and Wierzchawa Duzi, that they will talk about historical geospatial data, especially in the case of the historical atlas of Poland. Or you will see also some contributions about tools and services, like some that you might already know for sure, like ORCID, presented by Paloma Marina Zaira and Gabriela Meyas, and Protocols IO, presented by Emma Ganley, or more bibliometric studies, like Kevin Boyak's study on a model for biomedical literature, defined on the basis of some clustering made on PubMed records. And last but not least, some very interesting and very well-developed tools for exploration and scholarly data proposed by Konstantinos Stathoulopoulos. from Mozilla. He's presenting Orion, that is a very, very nice and interesting exploratory tool. And FATCAT, this is a catalog developed and presented by Martin Zigan from Internet Archive for preserving and tracing scholarly data over time. And I really invite you to have a look at all of them. They were really, really engaging, and they're very short videos, so it will be easy to follow them. Now, I don't want to take more time because we have a very tight schedule. So I would invite immediately the first speaker of this session. That is Stefano Zakirolli from Software Heritage. He's the CTO of Software Heritage, and today he will present his work on Software Heritage. And hello, Stefano, can you hear?
Hello, everyone.
And I can leave you the show.
Yeah, did you enable the screen sharing? Is it good?
Sure.
Okay. So hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to participate in this workshop. So I'm Stefano Zakirolli from University of Paris and INRIA, and I'm the co-founder and CTO of Software Heritage. So in this talk, I'm gonna briefly present what we do at Software Heritage, and of course the main interactions that our work has with open scholarly workflows. So first, just in a nutshell, what we do at Software Heritage. So basically, we collect, preserve, and share all software source code. So we are essentially a big archive trying to find all the source code which we can find, essentially, but not only from the internet. We preserve it in the very long term so that the precious knowledge which is embedded in software source code is not lost. And we give it we give access to it from anyone who might need that kind of access for any purpose. So we are tailoring what we do for three main use cases. So one is that we want to be essentially a reference catalog of all the different source code artifacts that exist out there. So essentially, while you have part numbers for a lot of the components that goes in the outer component that goes into IT products, we do not have yet the equivalent for source code artifacts, and that's what we want to provide. The second use case, it's essentially preservation. So making sure that source code which is produced and which takes a lot of time to humans to produce is not lost forever, which is something which has already happened in the past when some development forges or development collaborative platform had disappeared from the internet. We want to avoid that to happen again in the future. And third, we are building a research infrastructure, which essentially is targeting mainly in software engineering and empirical software engineering. And the idea there is that once you have collected in a single logical place all the source code you can find, well, you can invite scientists that want to analyze that source code to that place and enable them to run a reproducible experiment on the source code itself. So in our mind, this is a bit the equivalent of large infrastructure that physicists are able to build, like the LHC or the Very Large Telescope. And we want to build that very large telescope for scientists that are studying source code themselves. In essence, what we are a big crawler. That's the gist of it. And we crawl all the places on the web which are meant to be used to develop software together. So you surely know of GitHub and of GitLab, but we crawl a bunch of different places like different instances of GitLab itself, or Bitbucket, or forges that have disappeared that we have archived in the past, like Google Code or Gitorius, but also the repositories of package managers for specific programming languages, or the source code of Linux distribution like Debian and other similar distributions. So we are already today the largest archive of this kind which exists. We have archived, well, these graphs are a bit out of date. We archive now more than 140 million different software projects. We have a full copy of GitHub, for instance, plus other stuff. We have reached almost 9 billion unique source code files archived and almost 2 billion unique commits archived. It's a pretty big graph. The volume of the data itself is maybe not terribly interesting, but the point is that it's kept up to date, and today it is the largest source code archive that you can find out there. So what does it have to do with the kind of work we are doing in this community? And the reason why I'm presenting this here is that we are working on workflows that enable researchers to archive the source code which is relevant to their work. So today, software in general, and of course the source code that has been used to create that software, is pertinent to all kinds of experiments. It's not only computer scientists that use software for their experiments. In any discipline, no matter what is the field, you have some software which is involved in preparing and running your experiments. So we want to make sure that the source code which is associated to research work that you do is archived for the very long term and is referenced in a way that allows anyone to find it in the future for various reasons. Could it be for during the peer review process? It could be later on for reproducing your experiments, or it could be for reusing your source code later on to build on top of your work and extend it and improve it in the future. So we have prepared essentially guidelines for how you can use software heritage to archive source code relevant to your paper, and now you can reference it from your papers. So the main idea, which you will find described in details in our guidelines for doing that, is that essentially you should publish your software somewhere in a public place. These days, many people do that on GitHub, and that's fine, but we need to keep in mind that GitHub is not an archival platform. So while you can develop your source code there and you might want to use it to distribute it, you should not assume that it's going to be there forever. So the idea is that you first prepare your public repository, you add all the information that helps other scientists and other users use your software. And that includes some human-targeted information like README files, authors, and license files, but also metadata. For instance, for describing software, a popular ontology if it is called meta, which is what we recommend to use. But essentially, there is this part of curating the public repository that contains the code which is relevant to your paper. Then you can ask our archive to come crawl and archive your repository. So we have a web interface, which is at save.softwareheritage.org, in which essentially you can ask your crawler to prioritize visiting your repository and do that as soon as possible. In a few hours, depending on the size of the repository, your repository will be archived. And later on, you can reference your work using a specific identifier scheme that we have developed for this need. So we are calling these identifiers the software heritage identifiers, or SWID for short, and they have interesting properties that you will not find in other kinds of identifiers. So first of all, they do not depend on the middle layer or middlemen. So you can create a software identifier, a SWID yourself using tools or asking our archive to do that. But to resolve it, you don't need a middleman. It's not like a DOI in which you need to go through an intermediate, essentially, curator of that data to find your source code. So you can use that. And in addition, it contains some integrity checking information, which is very relevant for scientific reproducibility. So this is the syntax of the identifier. So it's we have a URI prefix, which is SWH, a schema version. You have an object type, which essentially gives the granularity at which you can reference source code artifacts. And essentially, you can reference either individual source code files or full directories that transitively contain a whole source code tree. Or you can reference specific commits that you have in the Git or Subversion or CVS or what you have in a repository. And you can also reference releases or even the full state, meaning where each branch points to at the time of archival of a version control system. And then we have documented and standardized the way in which you compute this checksum, which has several implementations and which right now is compatible with what Git does. So essentially, if you're using Git for your source code, the object identifier the Git use is at this time compatible and identical to what you will obtain from computing a SWID for your code. And then you can add a bunch of contextual information, like you can say where this code was coming from, or you can specify specific parts of that source code that you want to point to, for instance, specific lines of code or specific paths of code in a directory containing a lot of source code. So there are a bunch of examples, so there is a link to the full specification here in the slides, but you can find it later on. It is an increasingly adopted and standard format, so it is part of the Linux Foundation standard for exchanging software information in software supply chains, which is a standard called SPDX. It is a registered URI prefix at YANA for SWH, and it's also using Wiki Data to describe specific version of software that Wikipedia pages talk about in using a specific Wikidata property. I have a couple of examples here. So I don't know if you can see tooltip, but essentially behind those two links here, there are SWID in the form and the syntax you have here. So I can, for instance, click on this first one, Oh, you will not see, so I need to change the screen sharing, sorry. But essentially this brings, so I cannot easily do that now without changing screen sharing, but essentially the first link here will bring you to our archive in a snippet of the Apollo 11 source code, which is archived in our own archive. Or the second one, which will bring you to a snippet from the Quake 3 source code, which points to a very clever implementation of the reverse square root, which is essentially changed, sped up the way in which we do 3D rendering in video games, essentially. This is also software which is archived, and you can have a small identifier, which is complete, and that you can put in your paper to reference your the source code you care about. So this is for referencing source code, which is something different than citing software. So we maintain that these are two different needs in scholarly workshops. So you generally reference specific source code artifacts for reproducibility purposes, for instance, or for retrieving software that you want to use or build upon. Something else, a different need, is citing software, for instance, for giving attribution or credit to pieces of software that you have written yourself as product of your research, or for citing pieces of software that you use as part of your research. So for this second part, we have developed a Biblatex extension called Biblatex Software, which essentially has identified different kinds of artifacts related to software that you might want to cite, which are software products or specific versions of those products, or software models, which are subpart of larger software that you might be using, or even specific code fragments, which are part of pieces of software that you might want to reference. We have integrated that for people that use LaTeX for their scholarly work, and essentially it's well integrated into SWID where appropriate. So, for instance, if you're just talking about a software product by name, you usually don't care about referencing a specific piece of source code. While if you're talking about a specific software version, it's very relevant to identify exactly that source code and where it can be found in the Software Heritage Archive. So we have promoted this, we have documented this in various ways. It's part of the C10, and it's something that we recommend you look at if you're using LaTeX and if you want to be able to cite software. So in conclusion, what I've briefly presented in this quick talk is that I presented Software Heritage, which is today the largest archive of public software source code, and it supports scholarly workshop in archiving and referencing source code, which is relevant for a specific scholarly object, like a paper or other products of your research. We have discussed that referencing source code artifacts and citing software are two different concerns. And we have shown how you can build upon software heritage for these two different needs. So essentially with SWID, you can reference source code which is archived into software heritage, which you might have asked to be archived yourself. And with Biblatex Software, you can do the other part, which is citing software and potentially cross-linking those citations with SWID to find out what are the relevant source code artifacts to those citations. I've included a brief bibliography here with our work on the subject, but of course I'm available for a few questions if you have any. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Stefano, for the nice talk. I don't see questions at the moment in YouTube. And let me have a look on Twitter. I know for sure that there was Silvio wondering something. I managed to write it there. Okay. Just a second. I'll show you.
I see a question, yes.
Can you see the question? Okay.
Yes, so I read it. So the question is, did we register our identifier scheme in identifiers.org? And the answer is yes. So if you enter into identifiers.org, the SWID identifier, it will be resolved and will point you to our archive. Also in name to thing, I think is the other public resolver, and now it's in Indiana. So we hope at some point we'll also get some native browser support for looking them up.
Okay, we have another question for you. Do you see an uprise in the usage of your identifiers or software citations at all?
Yeah, so in SWID the adoption of our identifiers is growing for sure for referencing source code. For software citation, Biblatex Software is a very recent project, so I think we have announced it like a few months ago, so I guess it is too soon, and it also depends on the divide on the tools which are used in the community, so it only appeals to LaTeX users, for instance, right now. So for that, it's too soon, but Swede are definitely becoming more and more popular as time goes by.
Okay. I see many compliments for your project.
Thank you all.
Anybody else that would like to say something? Otherwise, I say it now, and it applies to all the other contributions today. You can post your questions on both YouTube and Twitter during the presentations or after. At the end of the workshop today, we will have a 10 minutes roundup. So if you came up with some question for Stefano, for other speakers during the workshop, because maybe you find some connections between the talks, you can post them there and we will discuss them at the end. So we have another question for you.
Yeah, so the question is, do I have any example of code analysis projects? So yes, there are some. The challenge is doing that at this scale, because most of the experiments you find in empirical software engineering usually targets much smaller data set. But there are some. We have done some ourselves in which, for instance, we have measured the growth of public code over more than 50 years now, showing it is exponential. And there are some studies going on, for instance, on all the commits we have archived, determining what are the trends of diversity in terms of gender in participation in public code over time. And that too is now covering more than half a century of public software development, if you want. So yes, we are seeing increase in that, and we are also working to build mirrors of our archive, which will help local research groups to do the analysis on their premises, which is much better than having to offload the computation to our own archive, which is meant to be an archive and not an analysis platform.
Okay, so if there are no questions. Okay, I would like to thank Stefano. Talk to you later if there will be the chance, and thanks again. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
So in the meantime, Matteo Romanello from IPFL in Lausanne will present today HUSI, the Open Citation in the Humanities Index. And I remove myself. Thank you.
Many thanks, Marilena, and thanks for having us. So before starting, just wanted to say that this work is done together with my colleagues Giovanni Colavizza and Silvio Peroni. So before I start, just a note on terminology. In this talk, I will use humanities as a shortcut for answer humanities, a domain that includes all GLAM stakeholders, like libraries, galleries, archives, and museums. The main motivation for building a humanities citation index is to overcome a certain divide that is emerging between humanities, in this broad sense, and the STEM disciplines when it comes to the use of citation indices. In fact, on the one hand, citation indices are emerging in the sciences as a tool of essential importance to manage the constantly growing volume of scholarly literature, and also for the study of science itself. But on the other hand, humanities researchers cannot fully trust existing commercial indices and cannot use them reliably for their research. But why so? Mainly because of the uneven coverage of these indexes in several respects. The disciplines that are indexed, the languages of publication, the types of publications as well as the types of citations that are indexed. This does not mean, however, that there does not exist citation indices for the humanities, but what lacks is an open and comprehensive index managed by a public organization. So let's see now what are the characteristics that a citation index needs to have in order to be useful for and trusted by scholars in the humanities. First, a comprehensive coverage of sources. In the humanities, there tends to be a higher volume of publications in languages other than English, while the degree of multilingualism may vary from discipline to discipline. Also, in addition to journal articles, books and monographs remain highly important and need to be indexed as well. And finally, besides citations to secondary sources, we find those to primary sources, such as literary text, archival documents, but also paintings, vases, and other museums objects. Second is the chronological depth. In fact, publications tend to appear at a slower pace, but at the same time, older publications tend to be cited for longer than in other disciplines. This results in the importance of indexing older as well as newer literature. And this resonates with what Roderick Page described in his lightning talk about the field of zoological taxonomy. Third, it is essential to expose as much of the citation context as possible in order to allow scholars to understand the function of a given citation. As you can imagine, providing such a rich context can be tricky in the case of publications under copyright, but I'll come back to this. Lastly, the fourth characteristics is more our own preferred strategy for building this index. In fact, for researchers, the more an index is comprehensive, the more it is trustable, as the lack of sources is impacting its perceived quality. Therefore, we believe that the best way to proceed is to proceed by indexing topically coherent batches of literature. So given these requirements for a humanities citation index, how can we build it? We believe that the way forward is to establish a distributed and federated architecture. Such an architecture will allow for both the collection-driven growth that I just mentioned, and also for keeping the digitized collections as close to their holders as they need to be due to the copyright restrictions, while at the same time freeing citation data. In fact, since citations are facts, they are not subject to copyright laws. Given such a federation of libraries, we imagine the Zika Corpus to act as an aggregator of citation data that are directly harvested from the endpoints of the respective data providers, meaning the research libraries. This way, all the materials that need to remain closed will not leave the library premises, while at the same time we'll be able to use the citation extracted from these materials. So there is no time to go into the full technical details and complexities of the architecture, but I would like to focus on the main building blocks of the index at the level of the application. So first of all, how can we enable libraries to index citations contained in their digitized collections? In a previous project called Linkbooks, we have developed an application called the Scholar Library that can be used by libraries to manage their digitized collections, and additionally integrates machine learning-based modules. What are these modules doing? They are extracting citations from the full text and linking them to the corresponding bibliographic records in library catalogs. The Scholar Library can be deployed by research libraries on their premises, thus allowing them to extract and expose citation data without having to worry about materials that are still under copyright. And you can find in the slide, when they will be online, there is a video to a screencast of the Scholar Library, as well as to the code, which is open source. Second, a federated approach somehow assumes that a shared format for representing citation data and bibliographic information exists. The Open Citations data model can fully capture and represent the semantics of humanities citation data, provided that domain-specific knowledge bases exist to provide unique identifiers for bibliographic entities that are of specific interest in a given domain. And I'm thinking, for example, of classical authors and their works, or archival collections, documents contained in archives, or museum objects. Lastly, the humanities citation corpus needs interfaces for both human users and machines. We have developed a prototype of what a humanities citation index interface could look like for an index of literature about the history of Venice, called the Venice Scholar. You have a link to the tool here, and it's openly accessible, so you can try it out. And one peculiarity of this interface is that, unlike existing commercial indexes, the Scholar Index provides citation profiles for both secondary and primary sources, allowing scholars to see what publications are out that are using or citing a specific archival source. So what is next? So as you can understand, building such a citation index in a distributed and federated way really needs a collective effort. and it's something that needs to be prepared, doesn't come from night to day. So we are in the process of building a consortium of partners. We are planning a planning workshop for the HUSI sometime tentatively in the fall next year, to be seen whether a physical workshop or an online one. And this workshop will serve to prepare a funding application to fund this project. So if you're interested in the project and you are a research library representative, or you are developed, or you are providing a bibliographic service like disambiguation or reference extraction or other services, or if you are a bibliometrics researcher who would be interested to analyze this data, do get in touch with us. Many thanks for your attention. And here you find a couple of links, both to the code and also to a description of the project.
Thanks, Matteo. Very nice presentation. We have already a bunch of questions for you. So let's start with the first one, quite general one. How is different from Scopus and Web of Science?
Well, I think the one difference is the types of citations that it will index. So as I mentioned, it will not only index citations to the secondary literature, but also to the primary literature, so the primary sources. And this is an essential difference. In terms of coverage of languages, it will also try to be more multilingual. So try to cover the full spectrum of languages that are important in the humanities. And there was one of the lightning talks about Ukrainian humanities literature. So that would be kind of a case in point from this point of view. And the other way in which it's different is that, as far as I know, Scopus and Web of Science are not built kind of bottom-up by libraries contributing curated citation data to a central index, but they are rather kind of commercial enterprises.
Thanks. Another question, a bit longer. Since social sciences and humanities disciplines are claimed to be more linked to location, is it technically possible to provide well-structured data for authors from their very beginning?
I guess in the question is meant like a geographic location. So providing this type of data for authors, it really depends, whether they are current contemporary authors or they are historical ones. For the historical ones, there might we can use, for example, VIAF, although I'm not sure about the to what extent they have like detailed information about the location. So it's tricky. There might be like older unknown authors that are not in VIAF, so that could be a problem. And for contemporary authors, we could use data in, for example, in ORCID if we're able to establish the link. So that would be kind of an easier problem. But I think if this really comes as a collective effort, bringing together research libraries, we will be able to harvest the authority data that these libraries have been collecting over time. So I think we should really address this problem from the very beginning of the project.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you.
Can a library from a country become a contributor to the Zika Corpus? Ideally, yes, as long as this library has digitized collections from the humanities, we would love to be in touch with you. So definitely, yes.
Okay, there are more.
Have you thought of using open and multilingual knowledge graphs like Wiki Data to assign topics to research publications? We haven't thought directly in the sense of assigning topics, but definitely Wiki Data could be a provider of unique identifiers for things that get cited in these publications, like authors, classical authors, because I'm closer to classics, but also vases, paintings. There is still a lot of it in Wikidata, although not everything is in Wikidata. So we need to be able to leverage Wikidata, but at the same time, also other domain-specific knowledge bases.
More?
what content is used, metadata from repositories or collections from libraries. So ideally, we would like to tap into the digitized collections of libraries. And given this distributed architecture that I presented, these collections, they don't necessarily need to be openly accessible, but it's just enough that the extracted citations data will be made openly available. Metadata from repository, definitely yes. So I focused in the presentation today more on kind of the content mining, but to do the content mining, we also need to tap into all the library catalogs because they provide a knowledge base that can be used for the extraction. So there will be the content in the one side, on the one hand for the extraction, but on the other hand, all the metadata in other library catalogs and the like to help and support the extraction.
Thanks. There are some more. Let's see if we manage to answer to all of them.
Yeah, we would love to have Arabic. I mean, part of the project proposal will need to be then how to tackle other languages, like testing extraction pipelines that are currently perhaps not working on Arabic and how to extend that. But ideally, we would love to have as many languages as possible covered. So if you have any interest in kind of bringing Arabic literature to the index, do get in touch with us.
Nice. So this one?
So the index right now, it does not exist. So there is a prototype that consists of data about the domain of the history of Venice. So, and my answer is going to be, the idea is to have a comprehensive index for each domain in the humanities, for each topic in the humanities. So we started with the historiography of Venice, and in that, I think we can claim it is quite a comprehensive index, but close to that, there are so many other domains. There is classics that is huge with a large history, long history, and many other also kind of smaller domains. So the idea is that proceeding collection by collection, domain by domain, it can be gradually comprehensive for each of these domains represented. You tell me when to stop, Marilyn.
Yeah, there are a couple. So I apologize with Martin and Letitia, but we will discuss your questions in the roundup session at the very end of the workshop. Thank you, Matteo. Thank you very much. Talk to you later. Okay. And let's move now to Ludo Woltmann from the University of Leiden, specifically from the Center for Science and Technology Studies. And today he will talk about responsible research assessment. Thanks, Ludo.
Okay, thank you, Marilena. Good afternoon to everyone. So I would like to discuss why we actually need open citations and open metadata more generally. And I will do so by making a connection to discussions about responsible research assessment. So my argument basically will be that responsible research assessment is impossible without open metadata. So David Shotton is, of course, the pioneer of open citations, and in 2013 he published this commentary in Nature in which he made the case for open citations. So he pointed out three problems of closed citation indices. The first one is that these indices tend to be expensive, and therefore many people and organizations cannot afford to access them. Second, even if someone is able to access these citation indices, there are still all kinds of access restrictions, which, for instance, makes it difficult to perform large-scale citation analysis. And finally, there are restrictions on the reuse of citation data. Since sharing of citation data typically is not allowed by these proprietary indices, bibliometric research based on citation data usually cannot be reproduced. What I will do today is to offer a complementary perspective on the importance of open citations and more generally of open metadata. And my perspective starts from the desire to promote responsible approaches to research assessment. So as you probably know, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, usually abbreviated as DORA, is a highly influential statement on responsible research assessment. It is a prominent example of a statement that emphasizes the importance of openness and transparency of citation data and of metrics derived from this data. So my thinking that I will present today builds on these ideas. There's also the Leiden Manifesto, another influential statement on responsible research assessment. As you can see on this slide, the first principle in the manifesto states that quantitative evaluation, for instance using citation metrics, should support and not replace qualitative expert assessment. And we have principles 4 and 5, which point out that data collection and data analysis should be open and transparent. So a concrete example of this idea of combining quantitative and qualitative assessment approaches is provided by a new evaluation methodology developed by colleagues of mine in Leiden. This is called the evaluative inquiry. And in this methodology, bibliometric approaches, for instance based on citation analysis, are used in combination with qualitative approaches like interviews and focus groups. And importantly, rather than applying the different approaches separately from each other, they are used together in such a way that they mutually reinforce each other and ideally blend together in a single integrated approach. So what we see over here is a pyramid, and I will use this pyramid to further illustrate this idea. So the pyramid shows in a simplified way how we make decisions in research evaluation, starting at the bottom of the pyramid with raw data that we have available for decision making, and ending at the top of the pyramid where the data has been processed in such a way that a decision can be readily made. So at the right, we see now how quantitative assessment is typically carried out. So at the bottom of the pyramid, we start with data on the activities and the outputs of a researcher or of a particular other unit of analysis. In practice, the primary focus in quantitative assessment is on the publication outputs, in particular journal articles. Information on these outputs can be summarized in lists or tables, or it can be aggregated further in charts or in other types of visualizations. And ultimately, the information can be aggregated in a single number, usually referred to as a metric or an indicator. So at the left, we see how qualitative assessment is typically performed. We start from basically the same data on the activities and the outputs of a research unit. The most relevant aspects of the data can be summarized or highlighted, for instance, in a curriculum vitae or in an interview. And based on this, further discussion about strengths and weaknesses of a research unit may take place, for instance, in a panel of experts, and this may result in an assessment report. And in the end, this will then lead to recommendations. It could be a yes-no recommendation, for instance, on whether or not to fund a particular research unit, or it could be a ranking, for instance, of the most attractive candidates for a particular job. So quantitative and qualitative approaches both have pros and cons. Quantitative approaches tend to be fast and also relatively inexpensive. And once we have agreed on a particular quantitative approach, anyone implementing this approach should obtain the same results. So in that sense, quantitative approaches can be seen as objective. At the same time, quantitative approaches are extremely reductionistic. So they leave out all kinds of relevant considerations that cannot easily be quantified. Qualitative approaches are quite different. They require more time, they may be more expensive and more subjective, but they have the important advantage of being able to take into account all kinds of different types of information and to interpret and value this information in such a way that it is fully aligned with the specific context and the specific objectives that we have in a particular evaluative setting. So what we see is that there are important benefits in both approaches, in qualitative and in quantitative approaches, and ideally we would like to combine the two approaches so that we can benefit from the benefits of either of them. So as already mentioned, exclusive reliance on quantitative approaches is not really desirable and can even be dangerous. On the other hand, relying exclusively on qualitative approaches doesn't seem feasible either. A qualitative approach will always face a challenge of information overload, and people need to choose in the end which information to focus on and which information to ignore, and how to simplify all the information that is made available. So people will tend to use all kinds of heuristics for this, and many of these heuristics are either implicitly or explicitly, they are of a quantitative nature. So we basically cannot avoid combining qualitative and quantitative approaches. And the question is, how can this be done in a responsible way? And one key idea is that quantitative approaches should always be fully transparent. It should always be possible to see basically what is behind the numbers. So when numerical statistics provide an unexpected result for which it is not immediately clear how it should be interpreted, there should be a possibility to explore what is behind the numbers in order to get a deeper understanding of what is actually going on and what the numbers really tell us. So let me very quickly illustrate this based on a research project of one of my PhD students. So this project is about government funding for green technologies in South Korea. And one of the topics being studied is light water reactors. And in essence, the findings of my PhD student can be summarized in just one single number. In the period of analysis, there are 759 publications resulting from projects on light water reactors funded by the South Korean government. And sometimes perhaps this information is all you need. This is sufficient, but for other purposes, we may want to dig deeper into the data. So we could then, for instance, explore the data in more detail by visualizing it. So we could, for instance, look at the specific research areas where these 759 publications are located. So that's what we see over here. So this gives us a more in-depth understanding, but perhaps this is still not sufficient because we may wonder what is actually going on in these specific research areas. So we may, for instance, want to see the list of publications in these research areas so that we can really understand what is going on, what the research is about. Even this perhaps is not sufficient. So to really understand what researchers are doing, you may not have the metadata of the publications that you see over here may not be sufficient. And you may actually want to read some of their publications and to really find out what they have studied. So what this example shows is that the value of being able to see what is behind the numbers is really important. When you do quantitative evaluation, you need to be able to see what is behind the numbers. And this will then also enable us to blend together these purely quantitative numerical approaches to research assessment with qualitative approaches that consider the actual content of the research being evaluated. There is, however, an elephant in the room. The approach that I'm promoting can be realized only if scholarly metadata is fully open. If scholarly metadata is not open, it will not be possible or it will not be allowed to make available quantitative information at the lower levels of the pyramid. We may then have all kinds of potentially interesting metrics, but we cannot see what is behind them. We cannot get a deeper understanding of what these metrics tell us. And this violates one of the basic requirements for responsible research assessment. So to conclude, the argument is as follows. Responsible research assessment requires qualitative and quantitative approaches to be combined in smart ways. And this means that it should always be possible to dig deeper into the data and to see what is behind a certain number. This is possible only if scholarly metadata is fully open. The conclusion, therefore, is that responsible research assessment cannot be realized without open scholarly metadata. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Thank you, Ludo. It was a great presentation. We have a couple of questions for you, if you would like. So, can you read it by your own?
Let me see how we do that.
So, it says, congrats. As you are the former editor-in-chief of Journal of Informatics, What do you think of the limitations of the shift of publishers like Elsevier to the support of open citations?
Elsevier is of course not supporting open citations. That was also the reason why I stepped down as editor of the Journal of Informatics. This basically means that Elsevier, that follows from the argument I just presented, is not supporting responsible research assessment practices, which actually contradicts some of the public statements they make. And this is, in my view, really problematic, deeply problematic, and something that we should all really think about, what that actually also means for us as researchers, as in terms of the responsibilities we have when we choose to work with particular publishers.
Yes. We have another couple of questions. What is the place of latent predicate analysis, semantic similarity measures, word and graph embeddings, machine learning, and automatic classification in context-aware analysis of research outputs?
Yes, that is a question that I'm struggling with, I must confess, because these approaches, of course, they tend to be, at least to some extent, they tend to be black boxes. So open metadata, open citations will enable all of us to do all these nice machine learning types of things. But we then basically do analysis that are closed in a different way. They're based on open data. They are in that sense also reproducible, but they are not really transparent, and only kind of people with certain expertise can more or less understand what they are doing. So for certain problems, I actually believe it is not really desirable to rely on these types of techniques. I do think there are other problems where it's probably fine to work with these techniques. So recently, for instance, we see the development of machine learning that is used for citation classification. So saying like this citation indicates disagreement, or it indicates support of one publication for another publication. And it is actually quite a difficult question to say whether that's a helpful development, or perhaps actually in some sense problematic and more questionable development. I don't have the final answer to that question.
Thanks, Ludo. Actually, I agree, like about the transparency and the tweaking of possible results. So we have other 3 questions, but we have 1 minute, so let's move to this one. At the top of the pyramid, do you think a single metric number wouldn't be problematic given the multiple dimensions when analyzing the same qualitatively?
Yes, it would be. So perhaps I simplified a little bit too much. So there should be multiple numbers at the top of the pyramid, or multiple metrics. That's also part, for instance, of all these statements, like the Leiden Manifesto, they emphasize this. So what I wanted to emphasize today is that we should not just have multiple numbers, because that's often what people consider to be kind of the most important thing. Like, we should have multiple numbers. We should be open to recognizing multiple dimensions in research assessment. I agree with that. That's all important, but it is not sufficient. In the end, we should also have the possibility to see what is behind the numbers. So in addition to recognizing the importance of having multiple dimensions.
Thanks, Ludo. Okay, we need to quit here the comments. We will continue in the roundup session at the end of the workshop. Thanks again for your very interesting talk, Ludo. Talk to you later. Bye. So now we move to the last speaker of our session, that is Alessia Bardi. Hi, Alessia. Can I unmute you? Oh, can you unmute yourself?
Hello. Yes.
Hello. So today, Alessia comes from the CNR, the National Research Center of Italy, but she also works at OpenAIRE, and today she will discuss about the OpenAIRE research graph. Thank you.
Thank you. So for those who don't know OpenAIRE is the infrastructure for open access and open science in Europe. And we've been funded by the European Commission with several projects, and now we are also a legal entity, so we're going to continue our work in support of open access and open science in the next years. And we provide several services in support of open science. So this includes national open access desks to support researchers and institutions at implementing open access and open science practices, and also policies at the local and at the national levels. We also have several technical services, and the OpenAir Research Graph, which I'm going to present today, is at the core of most of our services. And in particular, I will focus on the monitoring of the open science practices uptake in the research community. So we started from open access to publications, and this opened a lot of content of the results of the scholarly researchers. But still, the main players were the big publishers and companies. And then we moved towards the open science. But again, even the European Commission, in the end, wants Elsevier to do the monitoring. So we believe, as OpenAir, that the scholarly community can do better. So we should, let's say, take back our research products, so take them back in our hands and create a virtuous circle for assessment, publishing, evaluation, and monitoring of our research. So we started to work on the OpenAir Research Graph. So, and we see the graph as a strategic asset for open science and a public common good, from which all actors of the scholarly communication can benefit, and on top of which different services can be built. So we will talk about monitoring, but also for discovery and much more. So we conceive the graph as an open and decentralized resource, because in fact, the graph, the OpenAir Research Graph, is just a materialization of what is already available in the scholarly communication ecosystem. So it puts together resources that are scattered across thousands of sources all across the globe. And the aim is to have a view of the of the scholarly outputs in the same place, so that we can build services on top of it. So we have an open graph of metadata about scientific products, and not only publications. We also have research data, software, patents, and other kinds of research products, which are linked to the original sources, which are linked to funding information, so funders and projects and funding streams, links to organizations and research communities and infrastructure. So we aim at having a complete graph, because as it was said before, completeness makes the idea of trustable. So we are collecting metadata, links, and full text from more than 10,000 sources worldwide to materialize this graph. So here you can have an overview of some of the main data sources that OpenAir collect from. But if you want to see the full list, you can go on our Explore portal and you can browse all the content providers that are collaborating with us. And I'm proud to say that we also include software heritage, or at least the part of software heritage which includes research software. So here you can see some numbers of our graph. So we reached recently more than 100 million publications, and we find also the duplicates among these publications. And we have 10 million of full text for the open access publications, of course. And we use this full text to enrich the graph. So briefly, how we build it. So there is plenty of information in this slide, so I will try to summarize a bit. So we collect metadata from the data sources which are institutional repositories, our research organizations, libraries, and so on. So we collect the metadata about research outputs from them. We transform this metadata according to a common metadata model as to generate what we call the raw graph. So this is the starting point. So what's available out there? We complete this graph with information that comes from ORCID, Crossref, Unpaywall, and Microsoft Academic Graph, plus Scholar Explorer, which is a service that provides links between scientific literature and datasets. So we put everything together into the raw graph, and we start analyzing the graph to find the duplicates. So different records that represent the same research result or the same organization are merged into one. So we have some algorithm that applies several strategies to find the duplicates. And for the purpose of monitoring, we consider preprint, postprint, and published version to be the same, because when we go and provide statistics for the funding impact, for example, we want to count that publication just like one and not three. So after this process, we have the duplicated graph, and we can run our enrichment processes. So we take the full text of the open access publications and we infer additional properties and links to projects, to datasets, to publications. And some new properties can also be inferred directly from the metadata without having to look to the full text. So this graph goes again to another post-cleaning step, which helps us at ensuring that all the fields that can be controlled by standard vocabulary actually contains values which are compliant to those vocabularies. And this is the final OpenAIRE research graph, which is then indexed on a Solr server, which serves the OpenAIRE Connect, OpenAIRE Explorer, and the OpenAIRE API. And it is analyzed by a statistical tool for the calculation of analysis for open science. And this is what you can see in OpenAIRE Monitor. Completeness is a very important thing, so we are already working to include some of very important sources like Open Citations, Bayes, and ROR. And we also try always to improve the actual content, the fields that we have in the graph. So here you can see an overview of what we have. So we have research results with access right information. So if it's open, if it's closed, if it's under embargo, you can have the resource type, you have the licenses whenever they are available, the links to projects, and so on. The information about the journals where the research result has been published, and so on. And this is just a slice of the available properties, of course. What we can do on top of it? We can build services for monitoring. So we offer services for funders, for research infrastructures, for projects, and for research organizations. And the idea here is that we can provide measures for monitoring the funding impact, the open science trends, the open science uptake, and the research impact of these stakeholders. In the slide, you can read some example of what we are able to offer to the funders, research infrastructures, projects, and research organizations. But of course, we can do more on the graph. So there is an open horizon of opportunities based on the content that we have available. So these are some examples. So we can have the institutional portfolio with all the projects where the institution contributes, the research impact of services that are managed by the research infrastructures, for example, collaboration network, trends in research fields. And we have researchers working on this very different topic in order to enrich the graph and offer more advanced services on top of it. In the last slide, you will find some interesting links that you can follow to know more, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessia, for the great presentation. We have several questions. Let's see how many we are able to answer. Can you see them in overlay?
Yes. So, have you faced several issues related to the mismatch of licenses? For example, CC BY mismatches with CC 0. Data from CC BY publications cannot be easily added to CC 0 knowledge graphs. Yes, yes, this is an issue, and in fact, what we are able to do now is to provide the OpenAI Research Graph dump with the CC BY license, because we include content, for example, from Microsoft Academic Graph, which requires CC BY. So what we are planning to do and what we are considering is to basically have two versions. So one version of the graph, which includes everything that can be redistributed in CC0, and then the full version will be distributed at CC BY.
Okay, thank you. Let's keep some questions for the last round.
So with so many data sources, is there a need for communication standards, or is reading the data normally relatively easy? Okay, no, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And this is why OpenAI defines international guidelines for interoperability, which are called the OpenAI guidelines. And you can find them on guidelines.openair.eu. And these are very basic guidelines for exchanging information that is useful for citation purposes. And it applies to research data repositories, literature repositories, but also software repositories.
Let's see.
What are you doing with references to papers which you cannot locate in your infrastructure? Okay, so if we can find a reference to a paper that we have, in the landing page of the publication, you can find the link on our website for the other. When this is not the case and we don't have the publication, then we keep the string of the citation, basically, with a link to the persistent identifier, if available, or otherwise you just have the string with the reference.
Okay,
We
thanks.
hope that this will improve once we have open citations.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Alessia. There is one more question, but we will have it at the roundup session at the very end. I thank you again, and I thank all the speakers of these two sessions. We are now going to have a 5-minute break. So see you later, and thanks again. Bye. Hello, everybody. We are back. And just a second. Okay. We are ready to start the second part of our workshop, and we start now the first session. And the first speaker of this session will be our co-organizer, Silvio Peroni from the University of Bologna.
Hello.
Hello, Silvio. And he will present updates and the state of art of the Open Citations project.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Marilena, for the introduction. Hi, Hel. I honestly, in this presentation, I would like to start from a quotation from a great paper written by Robert Cameron a few years ago. In this article, Cameron imagines the existence of a universal bibliographic and citation database that is able to link every scholarly work that has been written and that is freely available over the internet. And such a universal database is seen as an important catalyst for reform in scholarly communication. So I'm director of Open Citation with David Shatton, and at Open Citation, this is exactly what we are trying to achieve. In this brief talk, I will introduce you very briefly what we have done in the past year and how we can improve all the data and services that we provide for the benefit of the scholarly community with your crucial help. And let me introduce what is the real problem we are facing with the metaphor. So suppose that we are in a city that we don't know. We are in a specific position, a specific place in that city, and we want to reach another position. And we don't know the city. We don't have the full map of the city to go to understand what is the best path to go to the end position that we want to reach, such as like an hospital. So suppose that we want to get to the hospital. So in a situation like that, one possibility would be, for instance, to pay someone to have that piece of the map that allow us to figure it out, at least what is a feasible path to reach our ending position. Now, today, this is a kind of absurd situation, considering that we are lucky and usually maps are freely available for all, for any use, either as a physical piece printed on a piece of paper. You can ask them, for instance, in information points in cities, or you have them available on the web using great services like OpenStreetMap that you can use for any purpose. Okay, this is the situation about map for cities. But what if all the data that we need to build another kind of map that is the focus of this talk, so the map of science, is paywalled and governed by a few companies? This is a real issue, since, I mean, such a map should be a public good, like city maps are. But even if the data that we can use for build such map of science are public domain data, we are talking about citation links, we are talking about metadata, they are just facts, they are not copyrightable. Currently, the way for accessing good amount of this data to building this kind of maps of science are indeed available by paying extensive fees. So the real solution to this problem, the solution that we are envisioning at least, is that the scholarly community as a whole must claim back this data that are public facts through the existence of open infrastructure that can help in that, and open infrastructure that are directly controlled by the community themselves, and in which the community is directly engaged in. And Open Citation is one of these open infrastructure. We are an independent infrastructure organization, which is entirely dedicated to the publication of open, in CC0, bibliographic and citation data. We offer several things, in particular data model for describing the data, the open citation data model, a lot of data. We have recently advertised the new release of the most famous of our open citation indexes, COCI, which now contains more than 733 million citation links, and several services, including REST API, in order to query and interact with our data. And this data can be used indeed to track the evolution of science in time and to discover research heritage. REST API were very important for us in order to provide an easy-to-use service to reuse our data in different contexts and in different applications. And there is the case that a lot of people in the community have used them for enriching, for instance, data in existing metadata libraries, or for creating wonderful visualization tool for networks of publication, like the one shown here, the VOS Viewer, that is a very well-known tool in scientometrics, in the scientometrics domain. And I have to confess that every month we are seeing an increasing amount of access to the REST API, which is by far, so far the services that the service that we provide that is used the most by the people. We have done these services. We have released this data in the past few years thanks to the help of several parties, including our institutions, University of Bologna and University of Oxford, funders that provided us grants for creating this infrastructure from a physical point of view, buying servers and software point of view, that allow us to have great collaborators that include Marilena D'Aquino and Ivan Heiby, that have developed a lot of software that is now used by our services, and a lot of additional services that allow us to retrieve existing bibliographic metadata and provide storage capacity for publishing the data that we made available. However, at the present, this is the maximum we can provide. Consider our limited effort. We are not a lot. In the few years, Open Citation was directed by David and I with these collaborators that I've mentioned. But as a community, we can, and I believe must, do more. So in the past period, a lot of experts, external experts, have praised the existence and the data that Open Citation provides to the scholarly community as a whole in different documents, policy report, papers in which are published bibliometric analysis, and also recently Scopus selected us together with other open infrastructure like OAIPN, DOAB, and PKP as worthy of community crowdfunding. So even if we have done a lot in the past, there is still a clear gap between us and the commercial services like Scopus and Web of Science in terms of coverage of data. And we need your help to fill that gap. And you can help in two ways: becoming a member of Open Citation and submitting your bibliographic and citation data to us in order to publish them along with all the others that we are making available. So a kind of prayer that I will ask to all of you is that please ask your institution to apply for membership. This basically will allow to support financially Open Citation, apply to membership in let's say, results also in be part of the governance of Open Citation at a different level. The strategic membership, that is the highest rate membership, allow you to have a seat within the International Advisory Board for Open Citation, that is an international advisory board of experts in the scholarly domain, that allow us to govern Open Citation as an infrastructure. Even if to be part of the International Advisory Board, you need to get the approval of the International Advisory Board, of course. And on the other hand, you can ask your institution to provide us citation data, bibliographic metadata, in order to enrich our collection and to publish them all together. We are planning to release a new bibliographic metadata collection in the next few months, that is Open Citation Meta, that allow, in principle, to also include articles that don't necessarily have a persistent identifier like a DOI that identify them, like, I don't know, ancient text and these kind of things. To conclude this very brief talk, we truly believe at Open Citation that a community-oriented and community-guided open infrastructure can provide citation data in a way that is comparable with well-known commercial and proprietary service. So what I'm asking here is, I'm asking you to help us to make it a reality and support Open Citation, and by supporting it, you are basically supporting open science. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvio. Sorry for pushing a bit.
Yeah, sorry for being
the more
a bit
you
long.
talk, the less the others can interact.
Yep.
So there are some comments. Let's see how many we manage. So there are 2 comments in a sequence from Alessia. So another problem is that currently open metadata delivering requires more efforts, more staff to prepare it. For example, in Ukraine, many journals published by institutions are not closed due to restrictions or licenses, but due to the lack of hands or money to pay for this work. You want to comment on it?
Oh, well, it's a situation that I know very well, even internally in Open Citation. We have a lot of ideas, honestly, but we lack manpower right now. So it's something that indeed should be, there should be some sort of financial help in order to allow anyone, not only Open Citation, but also someone that wants to contribute to improve the situation. Is a typical situation here. I don't know what to add, honestly, because it's exactly something that I'm experiencing daily in this case.
I know. Are you thinking to expand the support of non-English publications?
Yes, indeed. In a sense, we are collecting basically metadata, not publication as the whole thing. So metadata about publication. Actually, we have run already some sort of project on tests with non-English publication. We have collaborated with the Excite project, and there, for instance, in the Open Citation Corpus, that is one of our repositories, there are a lot of publication in German, for instance. As far as I've seen in the Open Citation indexes, since we are getting the data from Crossref, there are also DOI to publications that have the metadata stored on Crossref in a different language that is not English, even in Japanese, as far as I've seen. So yes, the idea of support non-English publication is one key goal, which we would like to reach.
Okay. Do you read the questions? Sorry, Silvio.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of the size of the gap between your funding resources and those of commercial services? It's difficult to know right now because I don't have access to, for instance, in terms of how many citations are in these commercial services. So I can speak for myself. I have a bunch of information coming from published papers that try to evaluate what is the amount of citation data in these commercial services. And as far as I understood, we should be more or less half of it. We used to have more or less half of it. But I don't have precise figures here because I don't have real the access to these databases.
Okay. Well, this is a very generic question.
Okay. Well, Scopus and Web of Science are paywalled, but how is Open Citation better, different to Crossref from Microsoft Academics? So the main difference between Open Citation and Microsoft Academic right now is that the license that we use for publishing the data. We use CC0. Microsoft Academics, so at least so far, use a license that is needs attribution. To us, using CC0 is very important because remove any barrier to the reuse. So our data can be reused in any context without asking us permission for doing that. This is the first real difference. In addition, as far as I've seen, we made available monthly updates in dumps available online, while it's not easy to access this kind of data in Microsoft Academic, according to my experience, and maybe I will be totally wrong here, but just my personal experience. And about Crossref, well, the main part of the data that we have now is based on Crossref. What is really different here is the API, to me, that we are making available. We can retrieve references of a given DOI, but also citation coming to that given DOI. We can provide metadata, including also some information about the open access availability of that thing. So there is a real relation with Crossref in terms of data right now that we are plan to expand in the future, since we are going to ingest also from others data sets, not only from Crossref.
Okay, thanks, Silvio. I think we are not able to answer the other questions.
Okay,
See
thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much for your talk. Okay, let's move to the next speaker. That is our co-organizer, Philip Meyer from the Leibniz Institute for Social Sciences. And today, Philip will tell us about non-source items in the project of Excite, in the context of the project of Excite, I guess. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Philip Meyer. Thanks for introduction. Just for your information, we attended also the last iteration of the workshop, 2018 in Bologna. It's a pity we cannot be there, but yeah, I think we make the best out of it. I will report today from our project Excite, which has been mentioned already, and we will concentrate on non-source items. A very special type of reference. I think most of you are aware of it. And yeah, we faced a special problem in Excite for this type of reference. And so we decided to start a second project on this. And I will mainly report about the ideas of the second project. But starting with the beginning, so the Excite project is ended last year. It's a joint project by GESIS and University of Koblenz. The idea was to develop a tool chain to localize, extract, and segment reference strings from social science PDF documents, often German language PDF files or articles from different venues, conferences, journals, books, everything, but mostly coming from the social sciences and political sciences. Yeah, we were developing a couple of tools, mainly using external tools, but also developed some own tools. You will find this in the green layer, but starting from the beginning. So we were doing layout extraction, reference strings, extraction, and segmentation. We did a major work in reference matching, which resulted in a tool called XMatcher. And we did a publishing activity where we converted our extracted references enriched with metadata to the open citation corpus. And Silvio mentioned exactly this. So all the tools are available, and we applied for a follow-up proposal. And this was very successful. 2 weeks ago, I got the feedback that the project is fully funded, and I will report a little bit about the ideas which we have in the second iteration. What we found out in the first project Excite is that the majority or a big bunch of references could not be matched into the indices which we were thinking of. So around about 60% of all references are non-source items. I will define them a bit later. So which we could not match 60%, and this we thought this is a bit too much. So we are concentrating in the second phase completely on these non-source items, which are an open problem, I think, in bibliometrics in a couple of domains already. But coming to the core, what is a non-source item? A non-source item, I think the term is coming from the bibliometrics literature. Here's one example of it. So it's all publications all publications which are not indexed by the public and famous citation indices, mainly Web of Science and Scopus, but of course we know that there are more indices. So everything what is not indexed in the past conference proceedings, books, websites are a non-source item by definition from the Biblatex domain. So we decided to be a bit more concrete with what is a non-source item, and of course it's everything what we are not able to match into our index. So this is the same definition, but we were a bit more detailed on what it is. So it's incomplete references or faulty references, and things which are definitely outside of an index which you can think of, which is often a data set, but we have today also data set indices, often websites and other material. So this is the thing. I will show you a couple of examples what we think and how we define an open non-source item. So these are examples from the social sciences, from the EXI project. You see example of data sets. This is the first entry. It's looking like a literature reference, but it's going to a data set. You have artifacts like personal communications. You find this in the references, sometimes also in the social sciences, but I think also in other domains. You see it in different languages, which often make a problem. And of course, things like proceedings, literature, or not typical scholarly publications which are outside. So these are typical references. They look like references, but they are not matchable with the typical tools. And this is exactly where we want to tackle on. We checked with other systems, and you find in every scholarly literature retrieval system, you find these non-source items. Here you have two examples from the ACM Digital Library, which is covering computer science literature. The first yellow marked entry is a non-source item. It's a conference proceedings paper. The second marked entry is a data set. So they are without a link. So somebody who is trying to retrieve them has to do extra steps. That's not provided by the information system. You have it in Web of Science. Here's an example of a workshop paper. You have it everywhere, and also in the more advanced systems like Semantic Scholar and Google Scholar, which do a lot of removing or decreasing the non-source items. You find them because of parsing errors or the missing availability on the public web, and then you have such artifacts which are not really helpful. Are they significant? We think yes. For research assessment, they have an influence. Here are 3 different papers where they found clear cases of we need more work and we need more inclusion of non-source items in research assessment. The first one is purely in the social sciences, and they have a significant effect on citation analysis. Also ranking departments in the second paper is significantly affected by non-source items, and also a recent study by Bojack and Clarence showed that if you include the non-source items, you double the content which you could analyze for bibliometrics or other studies. So, and that's quite significant. But our perspective, of course, is also from the information system perspective. We want to provide search for users. So also searching is interfering with these non-source items. You cannot establish seamless search. That's a problem. You stop exploration, and that's a problem for usage. So we think it's worth of working on this. So the idea of the follow-ups project is to better understand and handle these non-source items, develop tools to link their sources sources on the public web or in concrete indices, or if there's nothing available to generate resource source records, to have an entry where you can link to. So this is the Excite pipeline, what you see in the picture, and we are concretely working on these unmatched references and non-source items in the second iteration of the project. And we have 4 different phases. It's first item understanding. So you have to categorize items. You have to deduplicate them. So you have to build clusters of items, and then you have to find better representations better representations, richer representations, ideally with identifiers, to represent these clusters. And with these representations, we think we want to work on new tools to retrieve these items on the public web or in different systems which we have available. So to sum it up, non-source items are a serious problem, and in every scholarly search system, this is clearly visible, and I think most of you know already. And we want to work on tools and algorithms to handle these problems, working on the clustering, and also to provide better representations and provide better representations for retrieving these items somewhere and to link them. And in the end, of course, we want to provide this data again for the Open Citations project. And I think we can easily achieve improvements in any of these 4 phases which I have shown you before. As the project will come end of this year or early next year, we are very interested in researchers applying for a position at the Institute. So please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you. I hope I'm in time still.
Thank you, Philip, for the nice talk. We have a couple of questions. Okay. I think it's this one that is the same as the following one. Yes.
Should I read it first and then, or directly answer?
If you see it, yes, you can read it for yourself and you can answer.
Okay. Yes, we want to provide an online system as we have done in the first phase, and yes, we want to integrate whatever we can integrate. So Wiki Data is a very interesting resource, and as we have done in the first phase of the project, we want to provide all the data which we could enrich and resolve and link to entities and or landing pages on the web. We want to provide this to the Open Citation project and give it back to you so that others could resolve it in a different way. Because we know that many of these items which we have already identified are not resolvable because they are not really available. And then we will generate an entry which with an identifier where others can link to.
Thank you.
So I see one question.
No, it's the same one. No, we don't have more questions. I just have a quick question for you, but possibly I was distracted for a second because I was managing behind. Do you have any collaborations on this project? Like other than your collaborators, like is there anybody else that is interested in collaborating in this topic? Because I think it's very, very relevant. And I'm surprised that there are not many others doing it.
Yes, we have collaborators beside our co-PIs, sure. We have connections to geographers in Germany. They want to build a demonstrator to track down geographic citation behavior. So this is a major project at the University of Passau. We are working with them and using the Excite and also the outside tools to extract. They have the same situation where it's coming from scanned OCR PDF files, and they want to to extract all the references which are possible. So this is one direction. And there's another group in the education research, also in Germany, working with or planning to work with our Excite tools. There are a couple of reusers of our tools, which are all openly available on GitHub. Especially XParser is a kind of interesting tool because you can extract also footnotes, which is not provided by all the more popular and known tool. Yeah, so there is a lot of, not a lot of, there are some interest and some collaborations already going on.
Thank you. In the meantime, there are more questions arriving. So one is for you. Is there a URL for scientific programmer opening?
Not yet. We will do this later this year, but you can contact me before if you want.
Okay. How does your project compare to Grobit?
I think Grobit is a very good tool for extracting references and also segmenting references, and also getting the metadata of the PDF paper, so the authors and the title and everything. But I think they are not doing the matching into indices like Crossref or an own index. And I think they have no special focus on the non-source items. And this is what we will do in the outside project. Because we realized, we tested Grobit and Parsit and a couple of other tools. They have all the same the same problem. Matching is not their objective. They are just good in extracting, but to match it on a good qualitative level, you need to do some extra work. So we did the XMatcher tool in the Excite project, but still this is not enough. You need to do more with these rare outlying references which are not so popular on the web or in these indices which you have.
Okay, thank you. I think there is a very similar question. There is also the comparison with Biblioglutton. I don't know if you have heard, but
I'm not aware of Biblioglutton yet, but we will do some research before we start in early next year. What has happened in the meantime? So Grobit was one of the best candidates we found a couple of years ago, but I think there has happened quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, and talk to you later. Now we can proceed for the next talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So our next speaker is Daniel Mitchen from the University of Virginia, and today can you hear us, Daniel? Can you hear me now? I think there was a moment of wobbling. Can you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Do you have headphones, maybe? Because you can see the background sound.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I don't see you very well, I might say.
Well, I have you on 2 channels. I'll stop YouTube now.
Maybe.
You don't hear me very well.
Yes. If you quit some applications, it would be better.
We have to do what
you can share your screen whenever you feel
I have
like.
to quit every other application. Yes, I'll do that immediately.
Okay. Today, Daniel Mitchen will discuss about the current state of WikiCite. And as I said, he comes from the University of Virginia, and he's very, very involved in all the Wiki Data projects.
Okay. Can you see me now?
I think so.
Can you see my? Oh, okay. Good.
Wow.
So I'll have
maybe not this one. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see.
So
Okay.
the presentation is it's available on Zenodo. Then I set up an Etherpad for questions if the 5 minutes that I have are not enough, or I can't respond in detail. And I have 30 slides for 10 minutes, so it's gonna be very hasty, and now I'm being called. Okay, so structure of the talk. About me, then some information about Wiki site in general. Then what happened since on Wiki site since the last workshop on open citations, and then how you can get involved. Some data about me, since the slides are shared, I'll skip that. Overview of Wiki site. So Wikisite is a number of things. It's a community. The community has the mission to develop open citations and link bibliographic data to serve free knowledge, and the community has chosen Wikimedia platforms, especially Wiki Data, for this purpose. Wikisite is also like a set of infrastructure around this project, and it has a home on Wikimedia Meta Wiki and on Wiki Data. The origin of the project was the Wiki project source metadata on Wikidata, but since that is a bit of a mouthful, we now go by Wikisite. Also, Wikisite is a series of events. The 3 first ones were like in-person events, and since 2020, we actually went decentral. Part of this was planned, part of it was due to COVID. Then we have Wikisite reports. The most recent one is a few months old. I will not go through those, but I will take inspiration from the content of those reports and look at some things that we didn't have time and space to discuss in there. For those who don't know Wikidata, but the name came up already a number of times. It's essentially a sister project to Wikipedia. It is the database that anyone can edit, just like Wikipedia is the encyclopedia that anyone can edit. And Wikidata, in numbers that are relevant to Wikisite, it has lots of content, including citations. But the important thing here is just to know that the numbers are large, but the coverage is far from complete. Some others that are more relevant, like we link publications to topics, we link publications to people, the people to where they were educated, and people also to where they are employed. At the 2018 workshop, I gave a talk that was called A Guided Tour Through Citation Networks Around Public Health Emergencies. And my talk for today could have been essentially ready by just going back there, changing the queries from Zika virus and chikungunya outbreaks in Italy to COVID-19 and stuff. And I actually encourage you to do that, and I put in some links here, but I will decidedly not do that. For some more inspiration, there's an entire category of screenshots and other things from the main tool that I'm using for this kind of network exploration. It's called Scholia. And again, I will not go into that. What I will go into is a set of curation workflows. So topic tagging. How do we tell Wikidata that this paper is about, for instance, SARS-CoV-2? Or how do we distinguish papers that have authors whose names have similar strings in the publication databases? And also, how do we make sure that when we query for all papers about math education, then like basic algebra and calculus, they all show up. So that means we need to develop an ontology. And another example I picked is affiliation. How do we make sure that we can track publications from people at a given institution? So topic tagging, starting with Bologna again. If I just ask for basically the n-grams in titles of publications that contain the word Bologna, and then filter that for n-grams that still contain the word Bologna, I get this kind of list. And I can then filter that further for publications that have already been tagged with something that contains the word Bologna, so that it don't, for instance, tag the University of Bologna and Bologna, the city, on the same article unless there is a good reason to do so. And so on that basis of queries like this, we can do topic tagging. So we can identify the concepts, we can then look at which concepts in Wikidata they correspond to, and then we can tag the paper as being about that particular concept. The most popular topics in terms of topic tagging across the Wikidata corpus so far, they show that we have a number of biases. So lots of the tagging right now is in biomedical. Also, lots of the content, Wikisite content, is in biomedical fields. But we also have things like India, where we have an active community. We have nanoparticle, we have statistics. So it's not just medicine, it's a bit broader. We also have invasive species, and we will hear more about that later. So the original project for tracking citation networks and this kind of thing was the Zika Corpus. It came about at the same time as the Zika virus made its tour around the world. And now this has inspired the COVID-19 wiki project on Wikidata, and is in general a model for how Wikidata approaches humanitarian response. So once we have tagged papers as being about a particular topic, we can do queries that give us, for instance, the recently published works on the topic, or topics that co-occur with the target topic. And we can see which locations co-occur with the topic. So some of the co-occurring topics, they will have a geolocation, and we can plot those on the map. We can also compare this to a map where we plot the locations of the authors of papers on the topic. And those two, they don't always overlap, or very often they actually differ. And then we can, in order to do that, we need to know who the authors were of the papers. And for that, we have a certain strategy that is detailed here. I can't actually go too much into detail because of time, but we want to use ORCID whenever this is possible. The problem with ORCID is very many people still don't use ORCID. If they use it on a certain number of publications, then they don't necessarily make their ORCID record public. And if the ORCID record is public, it doesn't necessarily contain the identifiers that we would need. And so there are a number of roadblocks in the system that prevent us from this tool that is actually meant to solve this problem to actually use it at scale. And also, it doesn't go back in time. If we want to tag publications by people who died long before 2012, ORCID won't help us. So we have a number of tools that help us. So here is one that is specifically for this purpose. So if we have an author name string, Rosa Prato, and we already know that there is one item in Wikidata that shares the same string, then we can wonder whether that is the person that might be the author of this string, and this tool helps us figure this out. Then we need to figure out, once we have a person identified, we need to check, well, what are their institutional affiliations, and then how they link, how people link to institutions, basically. And there are different ways in which this could occur. Yeah, we will pick some of them. Then the affiliation tagging is something that then gives us the possibility to get a map of the locations of where people are affiliated who have worked on a topic. I've shown a similar map for the Zika virus. I'm showing the one here for Italy specifically for two reasons. One, if you look at the map and you consider the color code here, you actually see that there is a certain distance function. So the closer you get to Italy, the more publications there are by people about Italy. And there's one outlier here, which if you click on the actual link, will tell you this is Vanderbilt University. And this is interesting because Vanderbilt University has a project where they actually actively tag their content in Wikidata. And this increases their visibility in general, even on queries like Italy that don't seem to be necessarily the first thing that comes up when you think about Vanderbilt. So here's a bit more information about what they are doing. They're also not the only ones. There are other institutions that work on systematically improving the content related to them in Wikidata, and we strongly encourage that. And open citations are a key part of that as well. Vanderbilt is also part of a project where we try to map clinical trials in Wikidata. Almost all the clinical trials that are in the US clinical trials database. They are already indexed in Wiki Data. We've developed a data model, and then we try to link the clinical trials to the institutions. And then there's also a clinical trials might refer to each other, so there's a citation trail to be made aware of. In order to do all of that, we need an ecosystem of tools and infrastructure. Some of those tools are mentioned here, and many of those tools are actually general purpose, or they are built for users that are beyond our WikiCite, but yeah, they can be used for WikiCite purposes. So some of them are really specific. If you want to make sure that a particular publication gets entered into Wikidata, then you can use the tool source metadata, for instance. We have quality checks, and we have different ways to browse the information. So then you might wonder, what about open citations? Here, actually, part of the story is a bit, let's say, not so a success story. So we've had basically 2 years when we did not have anyone curating citations at scale, because the one volunteer who was doing this in 2017 and 2018, he just had other priorities. The downward thing that you see here is actually active curation, where duplicates were detected as such and then worked on. Yeah, I don't have the latest data here, but basically the number should be similar to that one. But there is now a request for another bot to be run to take this over. Then somehow I was expecting a different slide here. Anyway, so WikiCite is also a series of events. The history of the 3 physical ones is here. We had 2 physical ones this year in Czechia and in Australia. And yeah, these slides got a little bit mixed up. So here you have the list of some of the bots that are actually relevant to WikiCite. So Vanderbilt does the Vanderbilt data, large data set bot creates publication items. Then RefBot adds references to Wikidata statements, and then Open Citations bot is pending, and so you can go to the bot request page. And this is to work on the Open Citation graph. Now back to the events. So we have, for instance, profiles for today's workshop, and you can explore that. But there are lots of upcoming activities, and for that, WikiCite actually has some grants and scholarships. Details are given on the WikiCite page. So we have grants where we want to encourage projects of any kind that should have some relevance to WikiCite, some direct relationship to citations or bibliographic metadata. And also e-scholarships. The idea here is that we might be giving scholarships for people to attend things like a hackathon, and then the kinds of project that you could be doing on during such events like a hackathon is the kind of thing that you're now prevented from, since events are not allowed to take place. And so we thought, okay, we can give you a scholarship to do these kind of things at home. And yeah, you're encouraged to apply for those things. Also, WikiCite needs to be coordinated. Right now, we have a team that is named here. And there's no reason that this team just stays the same as it is. Most of us have been involved for a number of years. And we're very happy to consider others who might be joining us in administrating these activities. Then I would like to thank, in general, providers of open infrastructure. People who provided a template for these slides, the Wikimedia, Wikidata, WikiCite community, the Scholia team specifically, the Alfred Sloan Foundation that funds this series of events, the organizer of the workshop, and then everyone who is still listening or watching at this point. So you can find me on Wiki, on Twitter, or via email, and I'll go back to the Etherpad or follow whatever other channels we have for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for the nice speech. I think we didn't have much time because we're a bit running late. So I would pass you just one question.
Yeah.
And that is from Philip Meyer. Are there some recent WikiCite analysis on COVID?
Say it again, I didn't hear it.
Are there some recent WikiCite analysis on COVID-19 and SARS-CoV?
Yes, so there actually a preprint on Zenodo, which is run by I will put the link to that into the Etherpad. Zenodo COVID preprint. Yeah, I'll put that in.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe there is the time for another question. Let me see. This. Are you thinking of expanding main subject relations in Wikidata for scholarly publications by adding qualifiers to relations? Like adding further details of a topic can be useful for systematic reviews. Are you thinking of expanding the main subject relations?
Yeah, here it's important to know that there's a community decision. So if not up to me at all. Of course, I can voice my opinion. My opinion is I would certainly like to see more granular subject tagging. So, for instance, for painting, we have a Wikidata property that's called depicts. So we can express that a painting depicts a vase or a flower or a mosquito that sits on that flower or whatever, and it can have essentially any level of detail. For text, we don't have anything comparable at that granularity. We only have this possibility to say main subject. And of course, for a text, it doesn't make sense to have like 50 or 70 main subject, even though it might fully make sense for painting to have 70 annotations of things that it depicts. And so currently for text, we don't have anything like that. It has been proposed a number of times, and the community want to go that route. And I would say yet, because we can always repropose it, and then maybe at some point we find a configuration that actually works. And there are other annotations that have been thought about or discussed, for instance, like specifically to citation. We could consider implementing the citation relations ontology, like S2. Why has a certain resource being cited in a given resource? But the problem here is where's the data? So far, almost nobody is using this, and certainly not at the scale. And so the question is whether Wikidata is the right place to prototype it. But technically, we can do it. Here, the problem is more the data.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. We're running late. Thank you very much for your brilliant talk, and talk to you later.
And I'll reply to the further questions on the Etherpad.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks to you. Bye. Okay. So we have, we start now the last session, and the first speaker is Cameron Nayland from Curtin University. And today he will discuss about ownership of metadata. Hi, Cameron, and welcome.
So yeah, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I struggled a little bit with what to talk about in terms of this topic. There's lots of great detailed information, so I wanted to tease out a little bit about where we are and some of the challenges that we face at the moment, but also some of the opportunities. I don't think there's any question that the world has changed a lot over the last 6 to 12 months, and the next 6 to 12 months don't look like they're going to be any more settled. And we've talked a lot about how that's been a challenge, but what can we say about that as an opportunity? Many of the existing systems, structures, power, money has been destabilized in ways that are challenging, but are also potentially opportunities. So how do we harness this potential for change, and obviously in a way which is good and not evil? So let me start with a question about what we're capable of. This is a view that often greets me when I arrive for work any morning, the work we do at the Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative. We are more users of data than creators of data, so we depend on all of the good work that's being done. But one of the things I wanted to pull out was this is some of the sets of data that we've gathered from other places and integrated into the systems that we use. Lots of the things there that you've already heard about and will continue to hear about through this workshop. But what I wanted to point out here is just the sheer power of the systems that are at our fingertips today. Many of those data sets are in the terabytes. And these days I get frustrated when I run a query against all of Crossref and all of Unpaywall and all of Open Citations and all of Grid, and it takes more than a minute to come back to pull on that however many tens of terabytes of data it is. And I get frustrated. You'll see some open data sources there. You'll see some public data sources there that we can get for free. And you'll also see some closed data sources there. And I get frustrated on a daily basis about the fact that we can't share all of the data that we're pulling on. But also the opportunity here is, and you heard this from Alessia, and you heard this from Stefano, talking about expanding and creating these bigger open data sets. The open data is bigger today than the closed data. And that's a really major opportunity for us to leverage a whole pile of these systems, these great projects, the expertise, the networks, the capacity to be able to do really exciting science through the kinds of responsible evaluation that Ludo was talking about, to do the kinds of things that Daniel's just shown you that you can do at scale when you really have that metadata tied down. So I want us to really think about what it is we're capable of doing together. And I want to do that because I think we've got some truths that we have to deal with and some challenges that we have to address. Many of the projects, you've seen everyone talk about the grants they've got. You heard a few people talk about the ongoing funding that they are starting to get. But we're all competing for the same grants. We're all competing for the same pot of money. How can we avoid doing that, but at the same time maintain good discipline on costs and maintaining costs? How do we govern these systems, infrastructures, and projects? And those are different things collaboratively. How do we share some of the underlying systems more effectively than we do? We're still replicating a lot of each other's work, but at the same time, respect the differences that are needed to serve the different particular user communities that we're working with, that we represent, and that we support. And how do we work across organizational boundaries? Again, looking at standards and systems and interchange, not just technical interchange, but also financial systems, but also reap the benefits of diverse organizations. Most of the people talking today are based physically in Europe or perhaps in North America. Relatively few people from Latin America. I haven't seen anyone from Africa on the chat as yet, and no one from Southeast Asia, though the time zones are also an issue we need to deal with. That's a standards problem I don't think is an issue for our community. So we have all these sets of principles. I wrote some of them. And they can help. They can help us identify what we have in common. Perhaps they can also help us identify what we don't have in common. And maybe that's a conversation we need to start having a lot more when we recognize that we are sometimes doing different things and care about different things. One thing that I think is really valuable is that several of these sets of principles and guidelines and frameworks are really moving towards questions of values. And obviously, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the political crises and the climate crisis that we're facing, questions about inclusion and the ethics of including people in data without them being represented through that data and being represented in the governance of that data are big things that we need to tackle societally as well as in the scholarly communication space. We also need to get real. We sometimes keep operating as though there's this magic pot of money out there, and if we could just persuade funders to give us all the money, it would be fine. I think we need to start recognizing that's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen in the current climate. We have to recognize that we have to compete, and maybe we have to win in an unfair game with bigger and richer and better resourced commercial outfits. We all know how tough it is to retain good people. and to pay them the salaries that they deserve. But again, the scale of open infrastructure, of open source, and of open data is starting to tip the field in our favor, provided someone else doesn't aggregate and control that data for us. And we need to do better at sharing systems and resources. Those are big questions and big issues. And in 10 minutes, I don't have the time, and I don't think we have the space to really start to wonder about how to address all of those things. But I hope it's provoked some ideas. But we also need to start small. I want to propose maybe something simpler, maybe something that starts in our space that we can work with. And this is a thing that sort of occurred to me over the past couple of years, that often some of us, you're doing projects or doing systems, have money sometimes, and then the money is sometimes there and sometimes isn't. And often those people need the credit and profile. And as a result, you've already heard the conversation about CC0 versus attribution licenses. People tend to put attribution licenses on things, which prevents their usages in some contexts. Some of us need the money and have valuable resources and skills, and then we put the non-commercial licenses on things because we don't want people to use that data commercially in ways that we might be able to create the revenue. So this is just a proposal. It's just an idea we're knocking around, which is, why don't we, at least within the space of the small group of organizations and projects, make a commitment to each other. And this is an idea, and it's not fully fleshed out, it's a bit half-baked. But the idea is essentially that we create a club in which we agree to commit to each other, that we provide data to others, ideally in a CC0 setting, knowing that that's not always possible, that we always use the highest standards of crediting each other's data when we're using it to enrich, to compare and validate, as well as when we're using it directly. But perhaps most importantly, that we choose to pay each other where we can afford it for data access where that data source is providing a paid offering. So you've heard about the membership system for open citations. You can pay for metadata plus access to Crossref. You can be a paying sponsor of Unpaywall, and many other of these systems are right. If we choose where we can to engage in those processes to create an economy in which we respect the labor and the creation of data of others, can we create more community? And this point at the end is really focused on a question of can we start to create an economy that does respect the labor of data creation, even if it's only amongst ourselves, even if it's incomplete. And if we do that, will that provide the impetus for us to really interact more effectively on those shared standards, on not replicating work where it doesn't need to be? So it's just an idea. It's just a thought, and I'm sure there's holes in there that everyone can drive a truck through. But it's the idea here is, can we make a coalition of the willing to take some of this forward in a small way that starts to address some of those bigger issues? And with that, I will finish. I need to thank all of my co-workers at the Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative, too many to thank in the time available. Thank you for your time and for the organisers for the invitation. And I'd love to have a discussion about what we can and can't do around making sustainable infrastructure better for all of us.
Thank you, Cameron.
My slides never changed.
That was something that we were wondering. Okay.
Okay.
We thought you just had a very nice splash image. I know. Okay.
That's interesting. I wonder why. That was exactly the question I was asked before. Anyway, I'll share the slides later.
Oh, please. We will share them all on the website and on Twitter, so everybody will be able to see them. So we are running late, as we said. At the moment, there are no questions for Cameron, but I invite everybody to do that, and we can answer. We can answer to them later. Okay. Thank you very much for your great speech. Thank you.
Cheers.
So let's move to the next two speakers. Next, we have Patricia Finney. Hi, Patricia. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, nice to see you. Patricia comes from Crossref, and today she will give us a speech on, I guess, on the updates and the state of the art of Crossref. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. My slides. Okay, there they are. All right. So I'm from Crossref. I know many of you are familiar with Crossref, and many of you use our data. If you're not familiar, we're a not-for-profit organization. We see ourselves as an organization that makes research easy to find, cite, link, assess, and reuse. And we do this by registering persistent identifiers, DOIs, for our members and collecting and distributing a wealth of metadata about research. Metadata records that make research discoverable, but also help provide context and connections for that research. We don't deliver the research itself, but we help you locate it by registering DOIs for every record we collect, and also by providing rich, persistent metadata. And our metadata comes from our members, who are comprised of thousands of members from around the world in practically every discipline. I am the head of metadata at Crossref, and it's my job to help evolve our metadata in a way that makes sense for our community. We're really maturing as an organization, and I think about this a lot. What can we do to help move this along? I'm also, like a lot of other people around the world, I've been spending a lot of time at home, and I think about my house a lot. You know, just kind of distract myself from reality, I guess. And I can't help but draw a lot of parallels between my house and what I want to do with my house and what I do now that I spend so much time at home thinking about scholarly metadata. So at Crossref, we're going to be adding support for new types of metadata, and they present a lot of challenges. We have a very complex system that ingests this metadata, and it's been in existence in one form or another since 2002, which I kind of think makes it the equivalent of my house, which is 120 years old. It has good bones, and it is sheltered. My house has sheltered families for generations, but it has limitations. The wiring has been upgraded, but has it been done well? I don't know, unless I look in the walls, and then I personally wouldn't know what was going on, but that's another story. It needs better insulation, but to do that the right way, we need to knock down the walls, and that would disrupt our lives in ways that we don't want right now. There are probably things beneath the floorboards that we don't know about. You know, there's just a lot going on. We have to work around this to make a comfortable, welcoming home, just like the information world has to work around and within our own evolving infrastructure at Crossref, which I know it's a little corny, but like I said, I've been spending a lot of time at home. So we really want to help create a research nexus, a comprehensive set of interconnected scholarly objects that can be used in ways I haven't thought of, that can be used to facilitate further research and understanding into what goes into and comes out of the research cycle, who's involved, who's funding what, and more. And like I said, we're always surprised with what people do with our data. So I'm really excited about being able to provide more. So under our roof at Crossref, we have records for defined sets of content right now. I think for many years, our focus was registering DOIs for journal articles to be used in citation. So we've just got a lot of that comprises the majority of our corpus, but we have a lot of newer content types and kind of existing content types that are really taking off. We're getting a lot of books registered. We're getting a lot of conference papers registered. We've recently started registering records for preprints and peer reviews. And all of that metadata is available through our APIs. So our house is set up with all the basics. We support traditional content fairly well. If you're looking for journal articles, you're all set. If you're looking for really basic citation metadata and it's available, you're all set. But if you want something a little more, little more cozy, useful, and welcoming, there's more that we can provide. We allow our members to send us a lot of metadata, but we're all trying to work together to kind of flesh out this corpus and make it more thorough. There's increasingly research lives in blog posts, presentation slides, posters, informal articles, protocols, demonstrations. These are all being made openly available and are cited, and we'd like to support them fully within our metadata. I know a lot of you use our reference metadata. It's been mentioned quite a lot. Many of our references are open and available for you to use. I always think this kind of information is interesting. Like this is just a graph that shows the percentage of different types of content that have references registered. They're not required for everything, and obviously everything doesn't have a citation list. So you can see we've actually got more references registered for conference papers than for journal articles. We've got a lot for book chapters and preprints, but dissertations don't have a lot of references registered, which might be a shortcoming. And other things like standards, you probably wouldn't expect a lot of references registered for those. So it's not surprising that there aren't many registered. This chart, as many of you know, some of our references are available publicly. Some are registered with us, but aren't what we consider open. So you're not going to be able to retrieve them using our APIs. We've got a really good track record with preprints, which makes sense if you look at it. And the journal article percentage has gone up quite a bit, as have book and book chapters. And again, this is the percentage of openness, not the percentage of references that are actually available. But there are other things we might want to look at, like if you drill down deeper, it gets kind of interesting. I'm going to talk about data sets in a minute. If you move beyond references into what other metadata we collect, I took a snapshot recently of what is registered for journal articles. Out of 81 million, almost half have references. It's gone up a little bit. Less have at least one ORCID ID. 10 million have some kind of update related to a retraction, correction, or update. Only 9 million have affiliations. This snapshot's from a few months ago. 5 million have abstracts. I think that's going up a bit. So there's still some more work to do in encouraging our members to send us good metadata. So we already collect a lot of metadata, but coverage isn't complete, as I mentioned. So what can we do about it? This is essential, much like a kitchen. Right now, I feel like our kitchen has a lot of gadgets, but maybe not enough ingredients, and maybe a poor layout that makes it hard to cook something up. And there are ways we can address this, and we're going to take action on some of these. Journal metadata is essential, and we collect a lot of article metadata, but most of our members already have all of their metadata in JATS format. It's a format that's widely adopted, and we'd like to give publishers the option to just send that directly to us. We are doing some research into we're planning to do some more research into reasons, some really quantifiable reasons why members should supply us more metadata, so kind of get some numbers behind the value. We also would really are trying to work with other organizations to make metadata collection consistent. Like we've done had a lot of conversations with Metadata 2020. And we're also, we work a lot with NISO, and whenever I'm looking into making updates to our schema, I'm trying to increasingly make it consistent with what's adopted by other standards. We also really want to use more persistent identifiers in our metadata, let them do the heavy lifting for metadata quality. We're adding support for ROR identifiers, which is an open research organization registry of organizations. We're also planning to do more support, give more support for data and software citation. Those aren't really supported very well in our citation level markup. So we're going to be expanding that in our next update, which hopefully will happen sometime this fall. So another room in the hat of my house that I think is kind of comparable to Crossref metadata is the attic. We have a place where we kind of shove things we don't know what to do with. These things get neglected and forgotten, and they aren't used to their full potential. We want to register a lot of things, but we just don't have clear content types carved out for everything. So if someone wants to register something with us, like a poster or a presentation or a video, it often gets dumped into our dataset category, as this metadata is fairly generic, and that's not fair to data sets. It's not fair to anyone who uses our metadata. So we really want to expand the types of content we accept, and maybe for us this means moving beyond our current XML-based workflows or adopting new standards so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And of course, if you're a lucky person, you can have a nice garden. At Crossref, we want to grow support for wider types of metadata. We have lots of fertile ground and a lot of really invested community that wants to help us flourish, but we need to make sure the prep work is done before things can grow the right way. So right now, new things on our horizon that aren't planned for the next update, but I'm thinking about. I'm collecting more information on expanding the way we support open access status. We're going to add data availability statements, and I really would like to add accessibility information about the content that our identifiers lead to, and more that'll expand over, that little list will expand over time. And of course, we want to create an uncluttered, welcoming path to research. We're going to do that by creating relationships between metadata records. We already support those, but I think we need to do a lot of education with our members and a lot of, kind of advocating for the value of creating those connections between objects. You can move between, you can connect a conference to funding, an institution to posters, protocols, and more. As I said, we've got a bit of that, but we really want to grow that. The goal is to create a research nexus through DOI to DOI connections. All of these items exist and they're connected, but we rarely are these relationships made available beyond publisher platforms, and we see ourselves as a good platform for providing those in a standardized machine actionable way. And that goes beyond just research outputs. Last year, we began registering identifiers for grants, and this year we intend to register identifiers for conference events. And finally, if you're going to be opening your door to your home, it needs to be able to open. Obviously, you don't want to open your house to everyone, but we want to open our metadata to everyone. So we're really want to increase the quality and relevance of what we collect and make it easier to understand our metadata records and how to retrieve them, and for our members, how to provide us good quality metadata. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So we have a bunch of questions. Let's see how many we can answer. Let's start from this one. Can you see them, or should I read them for you?
Yeah, can you read them? I don't. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the first one. How important is CSL JSON for Crossref?
I'm sorry. What was that? Okay. No. Okay. Now I see the question. Okay. So we output our metadata in JSON, but currently, when members register metadata with us, they provide it to us in XML. So I don't know a lot about CSL JSON specifically, so it might be on our radar, but.
Okay. Let's see. let's move to this one. Is it possible for other parties to enrich your metadata and push those enrichments back to you? Would that be desirable?
Not currently. Currently, all of our metadata is provided by our members, and we do a little bit of tweaking. We've had a lot of internal discussions about facilitating that, because I think it would be a very big deal, very useful. But we don't currently support that. Hopefully in the next year or two.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is from Silvio. Can you repeat?
Okay. Crossref currently only handle publications with the DOI. Is there any plan to expand the support to additional PIDs? Well, not for registering. We have no plans to register identifiers other than DOIs. We have a concrete plan in our next update to include more identifiers within our metadata. So we're going to be adding support for affiliation identifiers and contributor identifiers specifically. So we're allowing existing identifiers to be added to our records, but we're not going to be registering anything other than DOIs.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we are running a bit late as usual. Thanks for your talk and your presentation. It was very nice. Let's be available for the roundup session in a bit if some new question comes up. And thank you again. Talk to you later. So, last speaker of this session and of the workshop, we have Vanessa Proudman. Hi, Vanessa, from Spark Europe. And today she will present making open the default. Let's see what she has to say.
So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm actually going to be talking about community funding and the importance of community funding open infrastructure. And I'll also give you an update on Scopus. So I'm actually going to link back to Cameron. So he posed lots of challenging questions, and I love Cameron for that. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm also going to introduce you to a short vision, and then also to some proposals from my side about how we can fund and what we need to do that effectively. And when I talk about community, I mean all stakeholders that have a stake in open science, that they need to contribute to the funding of all the great work that you've been reporting about. So not just grant funding, but also continuing that work into the future, also for operations and not just development. Hopefully my slides will work. Please let me know if they don't. Can you see this beautiful picture?
Yeah, now yes. Okay, we were wondering. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, right. So I'm taking you to a beautiful place. Most of us don't have the luxury of being anywhere except in front of our screens right now, or these days, or these weeks or months. So this is in Switzerland, and I'd like you to imagine a world where open really is the default, and where we have an open infrastructure that's, so this is enabled by a truly open infrastructure. It's powered by a diverse and very connected infrastructure following open principles that follow open standards, so open source and APIs where possible, where content is made available, machine readable, using open licensing, and that that's also easily portable. It's in line with academic values, and you, the communities, our communities are innovating and funding and sustaining this infrastructure. So that means researchers, governments, funders, research funders, publishers, other services and individuals, libraries. And what's absolute key here is that there is transparency, trust, equity, that they are central. And I think you'll probably agree that we're not quite there yet, but that's the vision. So for infrastructure to really thrive, we need finances. We need to collaborate regionally, nationally, and internationally, not just because open science is essential on a global level, but because funding open science infrastructure is hard. What's essential also is that we need to call for good governance within those infrastructures, that we have trust in those. If we're thinking of investing in that infrastructure, that we know that they're representing the needs of the community, and that they, that's right. Furthermore, we need a solid understanding before funding infrastructures of what the research community needs and how that changes over time. And we also need to understand the ranges of funding mechanisms out there that might work for us. What funders need is also up-to-date intelligence on how healthy our infrastructures are. So not only financially healthy and whether they're in danger and whether they're in need of immediate funding, but also how well are they interconnected with others? How critical is that infrastructure? Is that infrastructure a key node for many others, where many of us depend upon a particular infrastructure? I'd also like to encourage that there's more capacity building amongst infrastructures. So many of you were reporting on projects, and we know that some great infrastructures out there started off as projects by researchers like yourselves. And then they developed into organizations, services. But with that comes the need for more sales expertise or marketing expertise, legal, financial administration, all the things that you don't want to worry about if you are developing a service like Open Citations. So what I'd like to encourage is that the infrastructure community also joins forces and tries to share the experiences, shares the knowledge, the resources that they have, so that they can support their processes more efficiently, and that we don't waste them unnecessarily. And then when we consider what to fund, so for example, libraries who are stepping up and funding open science infrastructures, they're starting to do that, and I'll report on that a little bit later. They really need to see that infrastructure is just as essential as collections, if not more essential. And that message really needs to be shared more and more. I think Cameron also alluded to the fact that funders or grants, so often they are supporting great innovation that's been reported on today. But we also need them to see the importance of funding the operations of projects that have proved themselves over time to be essential in our community. So funding streams also need to change. So if we look at research funders, you are seeing that some research funders are matching funding as again, there's membership schemes, for example, joining forces with other funders to fund infrastructure. So I think we need to see more of that, because this is such a large challenge. And I think many of you who depend on funding outside of grants, if you're looking for donations or membership fees, you will see that there are funding regulations that really get in the way. There are organizations that are willing to fund, but they don't know how. So there are some countries, for example, who cannot legally fund, so they can't use public funds to fund something that's free. Or if they need to become a member or want to become a member, they need to get something concrete in return. So there are these regulations and hoops to jump through, and we need those simplified, and they need to change with the times. Now, we've also seen some great open science policy development over the years, but that needs to also come with the finances to implement that policy. And what we'd love to see is more national open science funds like France that can really make a huge difference to important infrastructures across the world. And what those funds, what all funders need, they need criteria and certification mechanisms that they confidently know who to invest in and why. And then lastly, what we also need is we still need to mobilize the community to fund that critical infrastructure. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about SCOS. So for those of you who don't know it, and then I'll give you an update. So this is actually one concrete answer on how the open science community can help fund open infrastructure. And this has proven itself. We established it in 2017. It's led by Spark Europe, and it's community-led and governed, and I'll tell you about that shortly. It assesses open science infrastructure and makes recommendations to the community for funding year on year, and it advocates for crowdfunding. So certain targets are set by the specific infrastructures for a period of 3 years. And I'd like to point out that there's no money exchange here. What SCOS does, we recommend. We're a kind of like a kite mark, if you like, or recommend a service. So who's actually behind SCOS then? If we are recommending the community, can we be trusted? We hope so, because we represent many libraries across the world, networks of libraries from Australia, Europe, the Middle East is represented, Canada, the Association of African Universities that has been doing some strong work in open access, the Association of Research Libraries in the US, we've got IFL that does commendable work in Central and Eastern Europe, Asia and Africa, and we've got the fabulous Redelic in Latin America also on board. And we have the very generous Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, who I've already mentioned previously. So before we make those recommendations, how does that process work and what does the SCOS governance look like? The Spark, because it's a Spark Europe initiative, we have 2 members of the Spark Europe board on the SCOS board that makes the final decisions year on year and actually develops the strategy for SCOS also for the years ahead. We have the SCOS executive group that works together with funders and the infrastructures and deals with communications on SCOS. And we have the critical SCOS advisory group, which is a group of members representing open science experts who understand the needs of researchers and open science users. So how does it work? SCOS basically year on year provides some guidance and advice on specific infrastructures annually. We share this with library consortia, other types of institutions and consortia, and then they decide on who to fund and by how much. The infrastructures set the fees, and those are tiered depending on the size of the organizations. Before we actually come to that decision on who do we endorse, I'm sure you're curious to know what that process looks like. Annually, the advisory group evaluates the priorities for that year. Is it repositories? Is it infrastructure from different parts of the world? And then we issue a call for expression of interest, which is open to all. We receive expressions of interest, and then that is evaluated by the advisory group, and they come up with a short list of EOIs, which is presented to the SCOS board. And then we make a selection for about 5 to 6 of those to submit a full application. And then we make a final selection on that, usually between 2 and 4 per year. And once we've made that selection, there is each of those that has that is endorsed by SCOS needs to have a work plan. There's an agreement of cooperation for 3 years, and they also need to provide an annual report. And that's for us to see that they're doing the work that they promised, especially when we're asking for funding for that. And it's also for you as funders to follow the progress, and Open Citations is one of those. And this is the criteria that if you're invited to submit a full application, we ask you all sorts of details so that we have confidence that we can recommend you. So where are we now? The community has spoken, and the community has helped raise 2.3 million euros. This year, over 500,000, even in the time of COVID, although I have to say that it's most of this is thanks to the French ministry. So we are really behind on funds. So I'm, appealing to everybody here to dip into their pockets, because I shall show you this year we have 4 great infrastructures that are important, and Open Citations is one of those that need funding for the coming 3 years. And we have so far 248 institutions that have pledged funds from across the world. In the first pilot phase, we had Sherpa Romeo and DOAJ. DOAJ is about to announce that they have actually reached their target. But as you see, Sherpa Romeo still has quite a way to go. And then we have PKP, DOAB, and OAPEN and Open Citations, where Open Citations is at 17% of its target. So still a way to go. And so important for you to think, how could you contribute to these organizations and to the funding of those organizations to put them on a healthier footing. So what can you do concretely? You can ask yourself how financially sustainable your infrastructure is, or that which you depend upon. I think that's really important to think about. And then you can also mobilize your colleagues to discuss how you can contribute financially to certain infrastructure like Open Citations in the interests of your project or organization's future. And then you can discuss this also within your organization. So discuss it in groups of colleagues across organizations, but also within your organization to see how you can contribute. So if you'd like to find out more information about SCOS, we have a website, scos.org. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. I hope I was on time.
Sort of. I
didn't see any of the prompts because I was all sharing my screen. Never mind.
No problem. We're running late. I hope people will understand and have just enjoyed, because it's very interesting. And I have several questions for you. So let me actually select them, because in the meantime I was preparing also the questions for the other speakers. Which one was the first one? I think this one. Yes. Can you read them, Vanessa, or shall I read them for you?
No, I can read them. Do you want me to read them out?
Yeah.
How can research funds emphasizing open science like Horizon Europe expand projects such as Open Citations? Well, with Horizon Europe, it depends on the calls. And of course, you're thinking about further grants for Open Citations. Often, yeah, it depends. To sustain a particular service without huge innovation or significant innovation, I think your address is not necessarily the Horizon Europe program, because they will normally really stimulate change and innovation and fund that. So I think you need to look at different models, different resources if you want to continue Open Citations, so funding the operations. But if Open Citations has ambitions to do something really new, then Horizon Europe could well be a good place to get some grant funding. But again, this is a temporary funding contribution. So I think it's important to think also, those of you who are involved in setting up new infrastructures, think from the beginning, how would you sustain yourselves? I know for some of these EU projects, it's a pencil pushing exercise. You're asked to say, how would you sustain yourselves were you to be successful? But really think about it early on and share some of those experiences, or ask questions to some of the other infrastructures out there on the business models that are working for them.
Okay.
So the next one is, can microfunding sites like Kiva be useful to enhance open science? I'm not aware of Kiva. I'd love to hear more about some of those types of sites. It's
Okay.
well, it's I'm sure if it's a trustworthy crowdsourcing site, if we are advertising it in the place where open science matters and where there are funds, then why not?
Mm-mm.
And what other models can be used to enhance Open Citations further than direct funding? Direct funding, not sure what was meant with that. Grant funding or
yes, exactly.
membership funding? I think Silvio mentioned the new membership scheme, which I think is a very interesting one. It also depends very much on where your infrastructure is placed. If it's in a university, if it's in a for-profit organization, if it's a non-profit organization, it all depends on where this has been established and where it's sitting, on which models you can use to gain funds from. But I think the membership model is a good one, and to explore other avenues as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, he meant that. Okay, thanks, Vanessa. I think we are done, and thank you very much, really, for the great talk and for being with us. And I will greet you now, and I will go back to have a look at the comments, because we have some unanswered questions that might worth to be answered. So first of all, actually, I would like to give at least 1 minute to Cameron Neelan back. Hi, Cameron. You are muted. Okay.
If you could show that, Marilena, you could show that one slide, just so because I spent the whole morning working on these slides, and I did share them in the chat. But this probably didn't make a whole lot of sense without the notion here. But I think the point I was really trying to make is, think about the ways in which the money you're bringing into projects and infrastructures might appropriately be passed on to other people. So if you're running a project that uses data from Open Citations or DOAB or OAPEN, then perhaps you should be paying into those and putting that into your project funds, your research project funds, and that we should all be collectively contributing. There were some questions around whether it's better for that to be a membership style arrangement between multiple community organizations, or could that be better done by MOUs or some sort of mechanism? And I think what's important from where I sit is that we make sure that we don't eat each other's, not just each other's food, but each other's seed corn, which is the risk if we end up with some projects sitting between the funders and the core creators of data. So I think that was sort of a question, an answer to Brian's question, and to some extent to Alessia as well. So thank you for the opportunity to put the slide up.
Welcome, and thank you, and sorry again. Okay, let me remove you, and let's go back to answer some questions of prior speakers. So, for example, let's start with Matteo Romanello. Hi, Matteo.
Hi.
I will quickly go and find the comments. I don't know if you can do the same, if you can see them, because there is a lot.
I can definitely see them.
Can you?
So I can read them out loud if you want.
Oh, please.
If I click, nothing happens because I think I don't have the rights.
Yes, sure. So let me go back because
and it's not easy to search.
No, not really, and it doesn't show me all of them. Oh, there are so many that I cannot go up. I'm so sorry. No, so I remember there was. Yes, if you can
read them slowly. Yeah, I copy pasted them. So I think the first one was from you. What methods do you plan to use to identify the context of citations, also considering the already mentioned copyright issues, for example, CTS, which is a very good question because we have thought in terms of how to model them, and using the Open Citation Data model that we get our own URI for each citation context, but not yet in terms of persistent identifiers to use for them. So ideally, the data providers would have already such granular identifiers for parts of the text, but this is not the case right now. So it's still kind of an open, open problem. So the short question is that we get a URI, but not another type of unique identifier. There was another question on, do you use OAI PMH protocol for accessing GLAM resources programmatically? And are there other ways and protocols? Well, having said that the Humanity Citation Index is kind of a plan for the future, we definitely, using OAI PMH is on the list. More generally, using any type of programmatic API that we can have to access the data from libraries and other GLAM institutions. But also, ideally, there will be also dumps of this data to be available, because there are cases where it's not enough to have API access. You would, for example, want to index a given data set using Elasticsearch to be more performant to do, for example, disambiguation. So ideally, there should be API access and also dumps available so that we can really make use of it during the process of reference extraction. And then there was a third one on, will UCI provide information on open access status? The short answer is yes, definitely. Not only that, but what we implemented with a Scholar index, with a Venice Scholar index and the Venice Scholar library, it's also to have some institution-based authentication. So if I'm looking at a citation that is being extracted by a text that is owned by a library to which I have access because of my affiliation, then I should be able to look at the full text. So short answer is yes, plus also some other services of being able to directly inspect the citation context for open publications, or based on affiliations for those that are closed. And I think there were these three. You're muted.
Sorry, and thank you for taking notes of the questions, because I cannot access them anymore. There are so many, and I think I cannot scroll up.
It's not easy. No worries.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for answering again. Bye. So, last one, I would like to ask Ludo Waltman to come back. Hi, Ludo.
Hello.
Hello. So there was one question for you remained. I don't know if you remember this question and you had time to think about it.
Yes, about the Korean example. I did not mention it explicitly, but indeed the Korean example that I gave was based on a proprietary data source. In this case, it was Web of Science. That means actually that what I showed, that was an interactive tool that runs in a web browser, that it's probably not allowed for me to make that tool available, for instance, to all of you by sharing the link. Because then the publication level metadata would become available to all of you, which is probably questionable from a legal point of view. We did indeed also consider open sources, in particular use of open citations, Crossref type of data for this project. In this case, the difficulty is, or one difficulty is, that it's important to have abstracts because we are partly relying on keyword searches in titles and abstracts. And as we saw also earlier today, abstracts are available only for a limited share of all content in Crossref, for instance. So that is for this project an important limitation, and that's one of the reasons why we chose for the moment to work with a closed data source. And this does actually mean that we cannot be fully transparent to the outside world about the results of the project. So there's a clear drawback of that choice.
Thank you. I don't know if Stefano is still with us. I think there was a new question for him. Thank you, Ludo. Bye. Stefano, are you there? Maybe not. Okay, maybe you will answer on the chat. So you are here.
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Sorry, I put down the camera, but I didn't note down what were the pending questions. So someone will need to remind me of them.
So there is this one. There is a freshly new question for you. Is the software heritage ID be used?
The software heritage ID could be used to cite all or part of a code. Could we design a similar system for the scholarly literature? So I'm not myself an expert on the scholarly literature side. I guess what makes it relevant in our context, which is software source code, is that what you want to reference in this case is specifically the artifacts itself, which is a specific sequence of bytes, okay, or characters if you want. So it's an object which has a canonical manifestation, which is not true, I guess, in the more scholarly literature world. But if you have similar artifacts that you want to reference, yes, similar systems in which you use cryptographically secure intrinsic identifiers might make sense.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. Do you think there is any other question that you would like to answer that you saw? Because I think there are not more. This one, I think it's for you. You include the affiliation of software authors.
Yes, so not in the reference mechanism itself, so not in the suite, but in the Biblatex software I mentioned, yes, there is the affiliation and there is a notion of parent software if that's relevant for software modules. For what concern referencing software, the extent of the context you can offer is what we call the origin, so essentially where the software was coming from, which is in general something like the package Git repository or equivalent system, but no more, let's say, semantic information than that. But you can include that semantic information in the source code itself using code meta or other software ontologies.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are done. There is one more question for Philippe. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you very much for being here with us, and have a good day. So, last question. Hi, Philippe.
Hi again.
I think there was one question for you from
exactly from Medina, And it's a very quick answer. So we are a short 2 or 3 year project, and we are not really providing a platform for the future. But what we really hope and what we think can happen is that the Open Citation will be a platform for the future and long-term preserved and long-term funded. And so we decided in the very beginning to give all the data back to Open Citations. They know what they do, they're open, and hopefully can provide such a platform in the future for all the other partners providing references and search infrastructure. So we give it away for the community and hope that guys like Silvio and Marilena and David take care of it.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Philip, for your talk, your presentation, and your contribution. It was very nice, and have a good evening. And thanks again.
You too. Bye-bye.
I removed myself and not Philip, but if you want, you can introduce David. Kidding. Okay, we're at the end. So now we would like to introduce David Schotten from the University of Oxford that will conclude the workshop for all of us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. What a remarkable meeting. Without all the anticipation and hassle of flying to Bologna, without the benefits of that wonderful city, without the benefits of personal interactions that happen in the corridors and are so valuable for conferences, with these highly focused 10-minute presentations, that means that everybody has to cut the waffle. Thanks to all the organizers who have helped us get this on board, and particular thanks to Marilena and Silvio for the splendid job they've done. And thanks too for the remarkable contributions from everybody, a glimpse of what open science really should be all about. Visionary talks and great questions from all the participants. We've had more participants in this meeting than we could possibly fit into the space in Bologna. So I think we have succeeded in many ways here. I think the maximum was 155 people online at any one time. So a concluding remark. We've heard a great deal about sustainable open infrastructures, particularly in Vanessa's talk. And I think what we need are sustained open infrastructures. So we've come to the end of the workshop, but to the beginning of the work for making that transition. We all have a lot of hard work to do to move from something that is potentially sustainable to something that is actually sustained and delivering a long-term service of benefit to the whole of open science. Thank you to everyone who has participated in this meeting, and as you go about your business, bear in mind that need for movement to sustained. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you all. And,
thank you all, guys.
And we hope that the next workshop will be live, possibly in Bologna and in some other nice place. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for the great speakers that we cannot show all together here, and to all the authors again. Have a good continuation of evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Goodbye.